Hello and welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Devin DeCuna, joined alongside by Daniel Davis. And on the show today is co-author of the book Effective Immediately, Emily Bennington. Effective Immediately is a high-energy guide full of lessons showing how first-time employees can survive today's baptism by fire workplace without getting burned. The book is organized by career milestones, first tasks, meetings, reports, and so on, so that ambitious new employees can ace their way to an employer's fast track. Thanks for being on the show today, Emily.
Thanks for having me, Devin. Glad to be here.
Now, Emily, of all the stages in one's life, why did you feel it was necessary to write for new grads just entering the workforce?
Well, it's been said that from birth to age 5, humans learn the most at any period in their history, and I have to say that if that's true, then the transition from college to career has to come in at a close second. When I graduated from college, like many new grads, I thought that I knew way more than I actually did and made a lot of rookie mistakes. And eventually I just decided that I wasn't the only one making these types of mistakes when I entered the workforce, and so I decided to put together a book to help other grads hopefully shrink their learning curve so that they could avoid some of the missteps that I made.
And just to go along with that question, what's the best way for a recent college grad to break out and find that first job as soon as they're out of school?
The best way to break out and find a first job, I think, is the best advice that I could give you is that there is no one best way. I think that you have to have a lot of irons in the fire, if you will, if you want to give yourself the best chance of finding employment. So for new grads, this means obviously having your online presence together. By this I mean a complete LinkedIn profile and actively, not just saying, okay, I put my LinkedIn profile up and now, my work is done, but really actively mining the site for jobs and networking opportunities. But don't put all of your eggs in the online basket. I think it's incredibly important to get out and do offline networking as well. And, you think about the various business receptions and networking events in the city where you live or the city where you want to work. Reach out to the Chamber of Commerce. Go to a business after hour. Get out. Look people in the eye. Shake their hands. Tell them who you are and tell them that you're looking for an opportunity. I think if you're very clear about what it is that you want and you just put it out there, the law of attraction kicks in and people will go out of their way to help you, but you have to know what you want first.
And also, I think you touched on it a little bit. What about someone's internet and social media presence? Should young professionals be concerned about their online presence, and do you think their bosses would be looking at their pages?
Yeah, I think that companies are looking at their candidates' presence online. Absolutely. I'd say that your online presence has eclipsed the traditional resume. And, actually, that reminds me of something, Devin. I think that one creative way that job seekers can stand out is to create not just the traditional Microsoft Word resume, but to create a resume for themselves in PowerPoint, for example, that highlights the same points that are on their traditional resume, but in PowerPoint format. So, for example, rather than saying, I worked on the Heart Walk for my school, you could actually show pictures of the work that you did, put it in PowerPoint, and then upload it to a site called SlideShare. SlideShare.net will allow you to upload PowerPoint presentations online. And the cool thing about SlideShare is that it connects to your LinkedIn profile. So you're able to have not only the information that's on your LinkedIn profile, but then at the bottom you can have this really rich, vibrant resume that you created in SlideShare. And so then when you're forwarding your information on to hiring managers, then that's one way that you could stand out in the pretty crowded marketplace these days.
Emily, Daniel here. There was something I wanted to point out that you definitely point out in your book, Effective Immediately, and that is first impressions. And I've been out there in the world of work for a good few years, and it just really amazes me when people come in to seek employment, the questions they ask and how they're dressed and how they carry themselves. And I'm thinking, have you ever even taken any kind of a career class whatsoever? It just blows my mind what I see out there. Talk about the first impression and what people really should be doing there.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the visual impression is incredibly important, because when you walk into the office, or if you're doing a Skype interview or whatnot, obviously whoever's interviewing you is going to have that immediate gut reaction. So you want to make sure that what you're wearing is, that you're presenting yourself in the most professional way possible. And I hear what you're saying, Daniel. My husband is interviewing for a position the other day, and somebody who graduated a year ago who still can't find a job came in, and even though he really, was desperate for a position, still wore a button-down shirt that was kind of wide open and a vest with no jacket. And so it's one of those things where you don't know unless somebody tells you, but everyone assumes that you know. So if you're going for an interview, by all means, the old advice of dressing for the position that you want, not the position that you have, is absolutely important. I think, aside from looking the part, it's incredibly important for people who are coming into interviews to prepare. So many students think that they can walk into an interview and wing it and do well, and that's just not true. And the last point I'll make on interviews is that when I was in a position where I was giving interviews for hiring for my company, I would always ask two questions. What is it that you know about our company, and do you have any questions? And I was always amazed by the students who didn't have answers to either of those questions. So those are basics. Always have questions and always know as much as you can about the company that you're interviewing for. With all the information online, there's just no excuse not to.
A few years ago, I had the opportunity to interview with Harvey McKay, who is best-selling author of Swim with the Sharks Without Being Eaten Alive.
Yeah.
And one key piece of advice that you just touched on there, and this is what he said. He says, I've got 3 pieces of advice for anybody out there if you want to be, within the standard we're talking about here, and that is do your homework, do your homework, do your homework.
Yeah, absolutely. He's absolutely right. That's why he's one of the best.
Emily, I was wondering, what are some of the biggest mistakes that young professionals make when they're entering the workforce? Yeah,
it's funny. I'm doing a research project now in preparation for my next book, and so I've had an opportunity to speak with recruiting directors and hiring managers for about 4 or 5 Fortune 100 companies in the last couple of weeks. And it's funny, all of them have said the exact same thing, that the number one mistake that young professionals are making when they enter the workforce is that they have expectations that are out of alignment. So they're expecting to come into a position maybe with higher salary, more perks, corner office with a view, and be promoted quicker than perhaps the organization typically promotes entry-level associates. So I think that, going back to the interview process, I think one of the questions that candidates could ask a potential employer is to outline the career path for an entry-level employee. So I just think that definitely keeping expectations in alignment for entry-level grads is incredibly important. Secondly, I think that a lot of new grads don't value face-to-face communication as much as they should. So much communication is done online or via text message these days that I think a lot of the face-to-face interpersonal is just getting lost, and that's a mistake.
Emily, I wanted to touch on that really. There was a friend of mine years ago who talked about what the key to success was in any endeavor that you decide to engage in. And he simply drew a picture of a baseball. And I thought, okay, so what's this all about? He says, well, you see those two lines on a baseball that come together? I said, okay. He says, what this really is a snapshot of two bellies. And it was belly to belly. Mm-hmm. And you don't see that too much. I mean, even going and getting a job these days, there are a lot of companies apply online. Me personally, I'm an old school guy. I like walking in and talking with the head honcho after I set it up. I don't want to be wasting time online, but it seems like there's becoming a more impersonal touch to that where you almost become a number. Mm-hmm. Talk about how we get around all that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I see that a lot myself, and in fact, I was teaching a course the other day, and we had some downtime, and I literally watched two high school students communicating. They were sitting beside each other, but they were communicating with each other over Facebook.
Or cell phones.
No, I couldn't believe it, and the reason why is because they wanted everybody else to see what they were saying. I am personally fascinated by that, and I just attended a conference in June where John Medina spoke, and John is a brain scientist, and he studied this for the last 20 years, and the big reveal of his research is that Gen Y, those who have grown up in the digital age, are losing the ability to recognize facial cues because they're just not communicating face-to-face as much. And so you want to talk about what it means to come into the workforce and assimilate culturally and prepare yourself for leadership. How much of leadership it happens face-to-face? Like nobody leads over email. Nobody leads via text message. So I really think there needs to be a shift in training back to interpersonal communication because if we don't, we're going to have a real dearth of leaders in the future.
Now, Emily, you talk about onboarding. What exactly is that?
Yeah, onboarding is the system of early career support for new hires. So when you look at employment turnover statistics, you discover that the greatest risk of losing an employee is during their first 18 months. Usually companies without proper onboarding programs and who implement the baptism by fire training find that they have higher turnover. So the whole point of implementing a proper onboarding program is to decrease turnover by increasing loyalty and engagement with your staff.
That's funny because I have a story that goes along with this. Recently, I just got hired working at this sandwich place, and fast food, it's very fast paced, so there's a lot going on at one time, and it was just too much for me to handle. So they let me go a week later. And one of the problems I had with this is that they didn't have any formal training. That it was just they put me on the spot and they had me learn from there. So I wish there was like a program or just some classes or orientation or just anything instead of just putting me out there on the spot.
Oh, yeah, and you see that so much.
Baloney's very intimidating, though.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I had a student come up to me after one of my presentations the other day, and he said that he had been recruited very actively by a large nonprofit in D.C., and he was evaluating a couple different offers, but he decided to go with this nonprofit. He was so excited about starting there, and he moved to the city and whatnot. And on his first day, his boss said, "I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for coming. We're so excited to have you. I'm going to L.A. for a week." And she left.
Wow.
And she didn't leave him anything to do. And his colleagues were wondering she didn't introduce him to anyone, so his colleagues were wondering like whether to jump him and throw him out or to shake his hand. And I think that sadly, from what I'm hearing with my ear to the ground on onboarding is that is more the norm than it is the exception.
Right, and that's pretty much what happened to me too. My boss was barely there, and I was just stuck with the employees.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Emily, that reminds me of an interesting story years ago when I went into a job interview, and what had happened is the person, he was actually going to be the general manager of a new store that was opening up, and so he shows up 15 minutes late. Then he gets on the phone for another 10, so now he's wasted 25 of my minutes. Now, I'm sorry, but I look at things equally. Yeah, I want a job, but I want to be treated fairly. That was the first poor example of being treated fairly. So he says, okay, so this is what the job entails when he finally engages me. And he says, are you willing to work under those conditions? And I said, well, I really don't know. I need to think about that because I'm already peeved a little bit. And then he has the audacity to say, look, I don't have time for that. And I said, really? Well, I don't have any more time to talk to you, you inconsiderate little, you know. And I said, you just wasted 25 minutes of my time. I don't want to be wasting my time with a company under your leadership. And I just turned around and walk out. Yeah. And you can do these things.
Yeah. I tell you what, I started, the reason why I got into this is because I had such poor onboarding experiences when I started in my own career. I mean, I worked for a magazine. And my second day, I was handed a stack of media kits and told to start driving up and down. I lived at Myrtle Beach. Start driving up and down the beach and knock on doors and pound the pavement. And, this was without knowing anything about the magazine or without knowing who had already been approached and the status of those relationships. I mean, it was crazy. And I just can't believe that businesses do this to new hires and not expect them to get frustrated, and then when you get frustrated, you leave, which puts the business in a bad position because then they have to fill that spot again and train someone new.
Absolutely. Now, you talk about things that bosses love. Let's go ahead and go over some of those.
Yeah, well, one thing that bosses absolutely love is open communication. And I think that bosses sometimes take it for granted that students know how to do that properly when they graduate. So one of the tips that I like to give new grads to communicate with their boss effectively is to send a Friday memo. And that's a really quick, short email that's in bullet format, and it should only take 10 minutes to create. But it's a quick update to your boss, and it's in 3 sections. The first is what you accomplished that week. The second is the areas where you need input, questions that are unanswered, if you will. And the third is goals for the week ahead. So if you send this Friday memo, a Friday update to your boss every single week, you'll keep that line of communication open and help him or her manage you more effectively.
Oh.
You know, Emily, one of the interesting things I found while reading the book is a phrase you've called illities. I hope I said that right. Can you explain a little more about that phrase? Yeah,
sure. So I think, again, just kind of going back to getting expectations in alignment, new grads, when they enter the workforce, sometimes think that they're going to make a great first impression by knocking a project out of the park, like just really having a home run on something big and important. But that's really not how it works in the real world. First of all, as a new grad, you're an unproven resource, so you're not going to be trusted with a big project just yet. So if you're just entering the workforce, how do you make those good first impressions? And what my co-author and I like to say is that little things are big, and one of those little things is what we call illities. So things like punctuality, do you show up at work on time? Accountability, dependability, reliability. Do you do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it? Humility is huge. Do you come in humble and willing to learn and be a follower, or do you come in trying to run the show from day one? And all of the illities for me really roll up into the ultimate illity, which is credibility. And when you have credibility in the workforce, you're in a better position to, get that move up the ladder.
Tell me some other key points, too, Emily, about what a person can do to move up the ladder. I mean, there are some people I've seen, and you even talk about this, ineffective immediately, about suck-ups. God knows anybody who's been around these people, they do very little but suck up. You know? But talk about some of the key things that people listening to the program today can utilize to actually find themselves moving not only up within the company, but also quickly, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think that the biggest part of promotions and kind of climbing the ladder is emotional intelligence, and really having that, what they call EQ, the emotional quotient, where you have the ability to adapt well in various situations and to various people. So, it's little, again, just going back to communication, it's understanding that 93% of communication is nonverbal, meaning that when somebody walks away from a conversation with you, they may only remember 7% of what you said. What they will remember vividly is how you made them feel. And I think that sometimes, particularly when you're new to the workforce and just kind of getting your feet wet and dealing with, multiple generations and multiple different personality types, that sometimes you don't understand how much emotional intelligence can help you move ahead.
Emily, that's an interesting thing. It reminded me of a job I had years ago where every Christmas what they would do is they'd put out a list thanking all the employees. And what they'd do is they'd put a little special message that was specific to each employee. Like, for instance, it might say, "Thank you, Julie, for being such a wonderful mother." And then, "Thank you, Bob, for always making everybody in the break room laugh," for instance. And mine was interesting, and I actually had to approach the manager and said, "I don't understand this one, so you might be able to enlighten me." But it said, "Thank you, Daniel, for having us all nervously anticipate your arrival."
What does that mean?
Exactly. I was like, what does this mean? And she simply said, with a big smile, she says, "We just never know what you're going to do." But it was really a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing. But I found that funny that they enjoyed my presence because of my unpredictability. That doesn't mean that I didn't do a good job. I felt I did a great job, and so did they. But the fact is it kind of added an entertaining, curious, what's going to happen today kind of a thing.
You always need one of those.
You better believe you do.
Keeps things interesting.
Yeah, well, that, and it also adds value to the company in a way that nobody else can replace you.
Now, Emily, I remember another funny story. I don't know if you remember about the flight attendant who quit while he was on the job. And it got me thinking, I know there's some unhappy employees out there, but can they afford to quit their job right now?
Well, that's a good question, Devin. It's really unique to each person, though. I definitely would not recommend that someone quit a job unless they had some way to support themselves, and be that with another job that they have lined up or some other way to live. And that's an interesting point, because there have been so many layoffs, due to these hard economic times, and you've got one person doing the job of two or more, and it's stressful. And it's so stressful that I think maybe some of the civility that we've had in the office in years prior is disappearing, because people are tense and they're nervous. And so I think it's easy to get frustrated more quickly. And again, this may be where emotional intelligence comes in. Like, you have to recognize if somebody's being incivil to you, that it may not be about you. It could be what they're going through. And so if you can tend to look at the people that are around you and understand a little bit more about what they're going through, it might be less frustrating for you, and you may be able to balance your work life a little better and not get to the point where you feel like you're so worked up that you want to leave.
Attitude certainly is pretty much everything, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's it's that old quote of life isn't so much what happens to you, but how you react to it.
Right.
Hmm. And Emily, another thing that I was interested in is, what is an example of something bosses can expect a new hire to know, but they actually don't know?
Well, I think a lot of bosses expect that when new hires come into the workforce that they automatically know how to work in a team. So much of business is done these days not by siloed individuals, but groups of people working together. And when you think about somebody who has just come out of school, our whole education system is set up to reward individual achievement, right? So you get the grade that you deserved based on what you did on your test scores or how you did your homework and that sort of thing. And so here you've got somebody who's just spent the last 18 years of their life in school and whatnot being rewarded for their individual achievement, and then they get into the workforce and they're just expected to flip a switch and be great in a team environment. And sometimes that doesn't always happen. And so I think bosses expect employees to know how to function in a team, but sometimes it just doesn't happen that quickly.
Right. I think that was just the thing with me, is that it takes a little time for me to gel with everybody. I think they were thinking I was going to fit in right away, but some people are built differently, and I was one of those people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where, I think that a good onboarding program can help, because a good onboarding program indoctrinates a new hire based on, what technical skills they would need to succeed, what cultural things they need to know about your organization, and what socially they need to know about your organization. Because when you think about how vested a new employee gets in a company, a lot of it has to do with how they feel and the social relationships that they develop. And I think that a lot of employers and businesses just assume that those social relationships will happen naturally and organically, when there's really some things that companies can do to facilitate that process. Be that scheduling receptions or just facilitating something where the employees can get together outside the 9 to 5 and really start to develop relationships with each other.
Emily, here's something that I think is really important too, but certainly add your input on this. I'm curious. When it comes to the world of work, a lot of times when people think about a particular career, they say, this is what I want to go and do, and obviously they're trying to make a living, but how important do you think volunteering in areas of interest is, and how that can really help somebody in the long run?
Oh, God, I think that's extremely important. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, Daniel, because right now, for some grads, it's obviously a tough time to get a job. And so rather than sulking about it and, complaining, the best thing to do is to go out and try and offer your skills and build your skills in a volunteer environment working with an organization that you care about. Because if you do that, a few things are going to happen. One is that you're going to meet some people who could possibly help you in your career, help you find a job. But the second thing is that you can actually test out your workplace skills in an environment where there's not it's not quite so risky, so you can make some mistakes, if you will. You can lead a committee, for example, and kind of flex your leadership muscle, your budding leadership muscles, in an environment where it's not going to affect your performance review, for example. So you can grow those skills outside your work environment. So for those reasons, I think volunteering, and just aside from that, it's the right thing to do for the community. But yeah, there's some very clear benefits to volunteering.
While you were talking, Emily, I was looking back at all the classes I've taken in college, and they didn't teach any of this stuff to me.
Yeah. And volunteer groups, like nonprofit groups, are again, I want to emphasize that volunteering for philanthropic organizations is absolutely 100% the right thing to do on its own. But I just think back to when I was working for a company and we would say, gosh, we're really trying to make inroads with this organization, but we can't through all the traditional channels, so let's see who we're trying to reach in there, who's our target prospect. Okay, then we would get online and look for where they volunteered. Because you find that the higher you go up the ladder in most organizations, the leadership within those organizations are very involved in their communities. And so that's a great way to connect with them in a way that establishes a relationship outside the traditional work environment. So again, the networking opportunities in volunteerism are huge.
What also shows, too, a person's passion and self-motivation, that they do something for the sake that it simply just needs to be done. And I found that as I was in companies, that was a philosophy that I lived by, was simply doing what needs to be done just because it needs to be done without being told. And it was amazing the opportunities that would just open up. And you're not being a suck-up. It needs to be done. I wouldn't even draw attention to it. A lot of times they'd have to catch me doing it, otherwise it was just done and nobody knew, and that was the other thing too. And it's pretty important to be doing those little things that matter.
Absolutely. And volunteering gives people an opportunity to see you working. And that's incredibly important. I know that when I chaired the nonprofit or the young professionals group here in our local community, I wasn't even looking for a job, but I had at least 3 job offers that year that I did it because there were people in the community who saw what I was doing. So it was almost like a audition that I wasn't even looking for.
It reminds me of a movie called 15 Conversations About One Thing, and stars Alan Arkin, and he's a boss in an insurance company, and there's a particular guy he just becomes annoyed with because he's always thinking about things on the positive side. That's just how he really is. And so the opportunity comes that he gets to basically lay him off or cut him out, and I mean, it's a legitimate thing, but you can tell that he really wants that he just kind of wants to see him gone. Well, then things start getting a little bit worse as far as that particular company goes, and you can hear some of the other coworkers saying, boy, we sure could use Harvey around here right now to sprinkle some of that upbeat cheer. They were missing him. And it started getting this guy to think, man, maybe what I did wasn't the right thing. So eventually he found a way to get him a job somewhere else, but told the guy, don't let him know that I had anything to do with it. And so he runs into this guy and he says, just out of the blue, this guy called, I got an interview, and I'm working again. See, I knew things would work out. And you see this kind of smile like, yeah, I guess with an attitude like yours, they should.
That's true. Very true.
And, I want to talk a little about workplace stress. I found that starting about 40% of the workforce would like to quit their job after summer vacation. Could you just explain a little more about stress in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, depending on how old that statistic is, I'm sure that if it was taken in the last couple of weeks with the stock market fluctuations, that number may be people may be more willing to stay in their jobs and ride out the white knuckle ride. But yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, just because of the recession that we were kind of slightly coming out of, it's tough because you have organizations that are stripped so thin that you have one person who's doing the job of 2 or more. And as a result, I think that it's unfortunate for the new grads that are coming into the situation because they don't have resources or employees that have the time to train them anymore. So that's where you get stuck in that cycle of people who come into the workforce and no one has time to train them, so they don't get trained, so they don't know how to do their job effectively, which causes a million other different frustrations, and then they want to leave and they're not performing at the level that their managers think that they should be performing at, which is more stressful to the managers, and it just really becomes this spiral, which is why I think that even though it is stressful, we all recognize how stressful it is right now and how strained businesses are, but I think it's a good opportunity for companies to sit down with the troops that they have, exhale a little bit and say, okay, look, we are all in this together, so what do you need from us? What are we not providing? Are we giving you enough feedback? Is there anything else that we can do to help you perform your job better? And I think that if employers would do that more often with the people who work for them, that the employees would be a little bit more loyal than they're suggesting on those surveys.
Emily, if you could, is there a website where our listeners can get more information about the book?
Sure. My website is Professional Studio 365, and on the site I have, obviously a link to where you could purchase the book on Amazon, but also a blog for. It's divided between information for new grads on how to succeed in the workforce and employers on how to manage the graduates that are coming into the workforce.
The title of the book is Effective Immediately, How to Fit In, Stand Out, and Move Up at Your First Real Job. I'd like to thank Emily for being on the show today, and I just want to say, if I had this book a couple weeks ago before I started my job at the sandwich place, I think I would have been a lot more successful than what I was over there.
Well, you have it now, so
yes. So this is definitely for future reference. Any thoughts, Daniel?
Well, I was going to say one more time, one of our listeners is asking for the website again. What is it again?
Sure. It is professionalstudio365.com.
Oh, very good. Okay, because they were saying here in a text message that they popped that in and it, for some reason, didn't come up. So
yeah, it's professionalstudio365.
Okay, studios365.com. Very good. Emily, thank you so much. This is always such a fun topic to have, especially this day and age with people out there really trying to figure out how to hang on, so to speak.
Indeed. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thank you again. We also want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis on behalf of Devin DeCuna. Thank you for tuning in.